Hi, everybody. This is Robert, and welcome to my channel. I'm here with an episode that I have been looking forward to. I'm discussing things with Kenn Payne, the creator of the Oracle of the Hecatean Path. Kenn, um, you have created a tool that has been long awaited for those of us who follow Hecate. I would like to know, when did this idea come about first?
So for me, basically, I'd like a lot of us, I was always kind of confused in a way that Hecate only ever really appeared in divination decks as a single card, usually, related to crossroads or witchcraft, just a single keyword and a single image. And in my sort of 15-ish years of actively sort of like worshipping Hecate, working with her and exploring like her background and her history and such, it always struck me that there was just this big hole in the market kind of thing. But obviously at the time I kind of considered myself not to have either the the knowledge or the artistic ability to create something for the wider audience.
What I'm hearing is you didn't think you were worthy to create.
That's what I suppose that's one way of putting it, yeah.
Okay.
So what I started to do was I started to just develop the idea of a very basic devotional tool that utilized some of the most, simple symbols that are associated with Hecate. And I started to use that just myself. I think it started off around sort of 25 to 30 different symbols, and then I printed them out onto sort of like little tiny cards, just with like stock images off the internet, and just would use them myself. And then over the years, the idea was constantly sort of percolating. And again, I'd come across her in, a new deck that would come out, and I'd be like, oh, look, there's one card for her. You know, and then I started to write I started to write a book, which I still haven't still haven't finished. And I kind of got the idea of, well, what if I gave instruction in an appendix on how to make an oracle in whatever format or, medium people were comfortable with, based on how I'd done it for myself. And it was during sort of that time, while I was sort of bandying it around, and sort of it started to sort of expand exponentially. And then I encountered the Healing Light Tarot by Chris Butler. And I got on really well with that as a deck. I was finding that I could read for people and myself really, really accurately. And then I started to see concepts that I'd had in my head in Chris's artistic style. And then you get that little voice in your ear that's like, well, ask him then.
Yeah.
So I just thought, okay, yeah, nothing ventured, nothing gained. For whatever reason, I kind of just assumed that, all published authors and creators and stuff are all in America, So I thought, oh, there's probably no chance of me ever getting anything beyond just sending an email. And as it happened,
Yeah, because we're a mythical
weirdly,
fabled land out here.
yeah, because we found out that we had a friend in common, and he lives obviously in the same country, but not a million miles away from where I am, but also not a million miles away from where I grew up. And his parents lived literally in the area where I went to school,
Well, I
and
should ask you
loads
that
of strange
before we go
things.
any further. Where are you located right now? Where do you live?
So I live here in the Midlands in Coventry, in the UK. So it's kind of slap bang in the middle.
Okay, that's you're saying words that I don't have reference points to. Just middle, top, bottom. That'll work for me.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not here in the desert by the Grand Canyon Tombstone. When you see all the gun things on TV, the Old West, where I'm at.
That's very different from the urban sprawl that I've got outside my window, I guess.
Yeah, I live 20 minutes from Tombstone. It's one of my favorite places to go and watch the gunfights. Um, ye, was okay. I have several questions. I'm not sure how to go about asking them. I've debated them in my head. When did you first hear of the goddess?
So it was probably sort of I think I'd kind of come across her in very basic terms in, things like, general mythology encyclopedias, where she'd have like a little tiny paragraph. And then obviously when I was reading books on sort of Wicca and witchcraft, she'd occasionally crop up and, oh yeah, she's the crown goddess of the, aspect of the triple goddess, but it never really I don't know, it just didn't make sense to me, because whilst I was trying at the time to sort of get my head around this triple goddess paradigm of maiden with a crown, it just didn't work for me anyway. And it certainly didn't work trying to shoehorn Hecate into this crown thing. And so um it was during that time I was kind of really pushing to get past that tertiary reference material that a lot of the time is not, there's no sources or references or footnotes or anything to it. It's just repeated information with no solid background.
I know I'm in my mid 50s and I met her in my teens. Back then, there was not the internet to rely on. You had to go by word of mouth. You had to hope you could find some books, um, at least in my circle.
Mm,
um, I didn't know of the magical papyri. I didn't know of the standard stories. I just had secondhand events from other coven members. I had tried to shoehorn myself into a coven at an early age. I knew that I wanted to follow a magical path. My mom was a Dianic witch. That didn't seem right to me and all her friends. I kind of got the feeling growing up that men didn't have a place in the magical world the same way women did. And that
mm.
messed me up for a very long time, which is one of the things I wanted to touch on you about. How did you overcome that? Did you ever face that feeling of being ostracized because of
Um, I wouldn't say necessarily that I've experienced it like in a first-hand direct way, but it is something that I've always been kind of aware of. It does, you do hear it about it in, in the communities and things. And I can kind of understand, it's kind of like a polar flip of, the mainstream religions for so long have been so patriarchal and so male focused. And then so it's well within people's right to want to shift that paradigm, but in some instances it seems to have shifted completely to the other side where they're guilty of exactly the same things but to the opposite genders. But yeah, it's always something that I've kind of thought about, and it's interesting because I was talking to Chris about this actually yesterday after we did the live with Gerald, and I always had it in the back of my brain that I was expecting a bit of a pushback from people because this is a goddess deck that has been created by two men. And but strangely, I've not so far come across any, negative, eh, in that context. Um, I, I mean, I always try to sort of live and let live. If people really want to be that sort of feminine about this is for this and this is for that, and no blurring of the lines and stuff, then fine, go and do it. It's like, as long as you're not harming anybody or denigrating anybody unnecessarily. Um, but for me, because I've largely walked a very solitary path, although I've kind of worked with people and in little groups here and there, I've largely been quite solitary. So I'm kind of just walking my path and just doing what I need to do and don't really take much notice of other people.
And who was it that first mentioned the name Hecate to you?
Actually, it was the goddess Demeter.
Well, that's a good reference right there.
Yeah, yeah, it was during a meditation. Um, it was during a period of time where I again, because I was kind of still in this sort of Wicca-esque sort of book learning period, and I kind of thought, okay, so now's the time to find, that mythical matron deity or patron deity. And I went on like a guided meditation and, really sort of got into it. It was, it was very much a very deep and vivid journey. Through a landscape to a temple and this, a proper like Greco-Roman temple with torches and all that kind of stuff. But then, interestingly, the woman that was inside it um was completely different to what I was expect. I don't know whether necessarily I was expecting, but I was surprised at the presence. She was this very she was very sort of large in like stature, not quite, normal human stature, but not like Titanic, but she had this quite sort of severe features, but they were quite beautiful and quite sort of stern, and she had this long sort of trails of like chestnut hair that was all kind of done up in a diadem and all that kind of stuff. And she was wearing a very sort of green, like dark green and sort of russet sort of robed dress. And obviously, as most guided meditations say, they say, oh, introduce yourself, ask who this person is, da 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 da. And yeah, so it was when I was doing that bit, and she revealed herself to be Demeter and stuff, and we got talking, and then she mentioned Hecate, and I was like, no real frame of reference other than, yeah, I kind of know roughly that she's a goddess of, the underworld or the witches or whatever. And so then I came out of that, and but then I kind of had got the bug, so I was like, right, okay, it's time to get detective hat on now. And so it was like literally like pull all the books off the shelves, go to the indexes, and start assimilating anything you can find. And obviously, I'm being fortunate to have access to the internet still at that point, even though it was back at dial-up speeds and things like that.
Oh,
But
that noise.
to yeah, to start to find references in a more historical context. And after a few years, that kind of led me more down into sort of the Reconstructionist groups and things, which were good for me to find out more. I don't like to say the word purer information, but because they go more to source than to personal notice inferred you know secondhand information. Um, and so I started to focus a lot on the history and learn about ancient Greek culture and religion and the myths beyond the Victorian era translations, which were often very heavily edited. I mean, most of that sort of time periods, translations of the myth of Demeter and Persephone. It doesn't even mention Hecate in it. But it wasn't until I found my way to the Homeric hymn, and then suddenly there she is, and it's like, okay, so she had quite a big role in this, and yet she was, moved out and put Hermes in her stead, kind of thing.
Hey, I can't really complain too much about that because I dual deity household here. Hermes and Hecate are both on my altar together. But the fact that she was edited out of a lot of things historically has always bothered me. One of the things that I think you and I have agreed on it came up online one time was Zeus allowing Hecate to keep her powers after
Mhm.
the Titan War. Um,
Yeah.
Allowing is a touch. I'm not going to say anything negative because the last thing I want to do is piss off a sky god. But I think you know how I feel about that.
Yeah.
I don't think I'll share this with you. When she killed Clytus, is that how you pronounce it? I've never actually had to say.
That's how I pronounce it.
Okay. When she killed the Titan Clytus, I don't think it was that she killed him that impressed everybody. I think it was how she killed him. I think it was how she destroyed him, which
Mm.
left a mark in everybody's mind.
Yeah,
And that,
because if you think about, literally, torches, even a goddess's torches, it's still quite it's a benign instrument. It sheds light, and then it's like, actually, no, I've just destroyed a giant, and
yeah,
do you really want to test me, kind of
I
thing?
exactly. I've always held that to be true in my mind, but it's not something I throw out to the universe because I just don't need that kind of negative attention. Um, Key bearers, key holders, light bearers, light holders, torch bearers, torch holders. These are how the followers of Hecate usually see themselves. I've never seen myself that way. I met her, like most of us do, at a low point in my life. And she pretty much picked me up like a stray puppy. And ever since then, I have viewed myself as one of her dogs.
Mm.
I've gotten crap from other devotees. No, you're not a dog. You stand tall. You carry her. That's how you see yourself. Great, groovy. I'm one of her dogs. If she says
Mhm.
attack, I attack. If she says sit, I sit. Um, this is just how I view myself. I've met a couple of other people have the same view. I'm asking, have you ever run into anybody that has a similar viewpoint?
Um, it's not one that I've personally kind of come across, but it's interesting because although because I'm a founding member of the Covenant of Hecate, and I've been with them since kind of the inception on and off, and I have within the Covenant of Hecate become a torchbearer and a key bearer, and those are kind of just loose titles for people that work within that community to help
Like I'm shaking
facilitate.
right now because this is the first time I've ever said it to somebody who is eh, I view you as authority in the Hecate community because you are a key holder, a key bearer.
And as I say, I've not encountered it directly, but I have, similar to you, I've heard that there are people that have considered that, and I don't see that there's an issue with that. I don't see it as it being a negative or a disparaging, thing. Everybody, I think, that finds their way to Hecate or works with her in a meaningful and long-term way, they all have a purpose, and she meters that out. So regardless of whether you want to be a key bearer or a dog or whatever, if that's not what she's got lined up for you, you know, it
I've tried to follow, yeah, I wear the keys, but I just view myself as this is my tag. It's my
Mhm.
Strophilus I wear. This is my tag.
Yeah.
This and when I do my dream work or my magical work, if I do shape shifting in that aspect, then I'm a really big dog, in my dreams. But this is how I view myself. And I guess what I'm trying to say is I have gotten pushback from a couple places. Granted, they've just been people whose opinion doesn't really matter. But um, I have you. That's my main thing. I just need to know if, hi, kitty, who's this?
Yeah. This is well, it's this one is Obsidian. If he's poking his head up, he's being nosy.
Nice.
Come on, get out of the way.
I've got a little black chihuahua I call Pearl, my little black Pearl.
I've got three cats.
Five dogs here.
Oh, blimey. Well, you've got the space for it.
Yeah. Um,
But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the potential for pushback on this sort of thing probably comes from people's assumption based on how we as humans view dogs. We view them as pets or, you know, servants or, something that we are, we have command over. Whereas in the context of the goddess, it's not the same. They are loyal companions and guides and guardians and emissaries and and I think possibly the pushback comes
Messengers.
from the very human side of people thinking, well, no, a dog is a very low form, so why would you associate yourself with that? Whereas actually it doesn't work that way when you put it into the context of, divinity.
Uh, exactly. That's pretty much how I'm viewing it. And regardless of other people, regardless of other people's opinions, I understand where I stand with the goddess, and that is what is important to me. Um, there has been a couple of times I've seen online where people have mentioned your name in esteemed company. Um, Sarita Desti, Cindy Brennan, Arthur Waite, Pamela Coleman Smith, Kenn Payne. Is that weird yet? Or is it weird still?
I haven't. Well, I mean, I've known Sarita for since 2011. I was very fortunate at that time in the early stages of me sort of getting to grips with Hekate that I was a friend I had who was part of one of her covens at the time. They all got together for the second rite of her sacred fires at Sarita's then home. And I was I was very, very fortunate to be invited along. And obviously at the same time, I got to meet her then husband, David Rankin, Tara Sanchez that wrote the Temple of Hecate and has, done tarot and stuff herself. Emily Carding as well, I got to meet, and a few other esteemed people. And so when I sort of talk, if I ever come across me sort of being talked about, in context of Sarita, it's kind of, yeah, well, I know Sarita, so but I've
Yeah.
yeah, and I mean
Well,
I've
why
kind
don't you
of
explain real quick who Sarita is and tell a little bit about the covenant?
so Sarita DSD is an author and publisher and historian and general sorceress wild woman. I'm sure she would quite happily accept those titles. She runs Avalonia Books from where she lives now in Glastonbury in England. She's published several books on Hecate, both like historical and also sort of like devotional anthology type books. Obviously, the big one that kind of spearheaded everything off was Hecate, Her Sacred Fires. Um, and off the back of the publication of that and the idea of the rite of her sacred fires was just a one-off ritual for the launch of the book, and then it became this thing that everybody wanted to continue doing.
Yeah,
So has
we in the States
become
hear about it and wish we could go.
yeah, and it's we do it every year now, and so it's been every year since 2010, and it gets people together, people even people that are very remote and not connected to people locally or even that many people online, they are still able to connect to the community on a global scale, especially during that time. And again, off the back of that, then it became the foundation of the Covenant of Hecate, which is a global, I suppose, an organization that of different people from all walks of life and all parts of the world that have come together to, to honor Hecate. She's viewed within the covenant as Hecate Sotera, the savior, and also the cosmic world soul, sort of from the Chaldean oracles. Um, and it's just a place where people can come and we can learn from each other. We can kind of start to sort of get work through some of the perpetuated myths and misinformation. There's been so much work done by so many different people in the last sort of 10 years or so to really dispel a lot of the misinformation that was out there for so long. And there are so many great resources now from various authors and creators, some of whom have either been part of the Covenant at some point or other, or still are part of the Covenant. And yeah, I mean, she is a force of nature. I mean, how she
It
ever,
sounds like
how
somebody who brings change everywhere she goes.
Oh God, yes. I mean, I've never known her stand still. To be honest, I've never known her sleep either. But she just seems to constantly have energy to do what needs to be done.
Um, Speaking of myths that need to be cleared up, what are some of the most annoying myths that you've had to deal with?
Well, I mean, my viewpoint has changed a bit, obviously, as I've started to sort of view things differently and learn different things. I used to be really like bullish about the whole like crone thing, and I was just like, nope, 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 nope. And I get that there is no historical context and that now, but I kind of have come to the understanding that if that's how she, you know, resonates with somebody, at the end of the day, she's a deity and she can appear however she wants to appear. If we think about some of the, other myths where gods are described in their true forms, like the myth of Dionysus' birth, where, you know, Semele asks Zeus to appear in his true form, and it's too much for us, as a human, so she's burnt to a crisp. It's the same kind of thing that there are so many different facets to Hecate that there's, for us to sort of rule one out indefinitely is kind of limiting her access to people that might relate better to an older figure, to a grandmotherly figure. That's not to say, that's not to say that yes, she's an old woman, because again, age doesn't it has no context in divinity. Um, we see in the myths that if the gods wanted to go to Earth, they generally would disguise themselves as old, beggars or travelers and stuff, because it was seen as, inconspicuous. But it's not that they became old, because I mean, if at the end of the day they are old, they're millennia old. But you know,
It's just a skin suit they chose to wear for the day.
yeah. And so I still try, if it crops up, I still try to perpetuate the fact that, she was not seen as a crone in a historical context, even if when in sort of later antiquity, when things started to get a bit more darker and a bit more sort of underworldy and things, it's still not
I like that
really
word, underworldly.
it's still not really um a defining feature of age. It's just the fact that there are more unsavory qualities, and again, it's this human element that we apply to viewing deity, where in the same way as back in antiquity, witches and witchcraft stuff, it was unsavory, so therefore it all had to be kept on the outskirts of civilization. And
Hmm.
it's almost the same, especially if you look at the way that certain facets of the Western world treat old age now. We want them all out of the way, shut up in homes and stuff where we don't have to think or worry or think. The later stages of life and into death is so sanitized for us and so far removed for us that we kind of had that association with, oh, well, they're far away and they're distant and we can't really get involved with it. But as I say, if people are able to connect with her better that way, who's to say that 5 years down the line, that skin suit doesn't then drop off to reveal something else? A different way of following her. It's what I think. I think it's whatever gets you on the path to start with. Once, because I'm firmly of the belief that once you're on it until she decides to boot you off
Exactly.
it.
The biggest myth that scared me when I started working with Hekate as a youngin was I was told, and again we're going back to a coven of Dianic witches who were not, this specific coven was not the best minded towards men, I should say. That men used to be castrated if they were going to worship Hekate.
Mm.
Is this a fallacy?
So there is reference to a um a sort of priesthood of castrated males that are sometimes referred to in relation to Hecate, and I forget, it's something like the Seminatoi or something like that. There is a book over on the bookshelf. It's a big encyclopedia of like queer things, and it mentions them in there in relation to Hecate. More historically, the castrated priesthoods were generally more associated with Kybele, and her cults and stuff like that. But again, there's not always the specifics of to the the actual castration. Was it full, you know, phallus and testes removed, or was it just the testes? Or there was lots of different potential variations on what actual castration for a priesthood actually meant. Um, so yeah, I think there's a kind of a very vague association with it, but not to the not to an exclusive point. It's not that all priests were castrated males.
Well, historically speaking, I'm glad it's not a mandatory. That would really suck. Um, Mr. Man, your cards.
hmm,
The artwork on this deck is awesome. Mr. Chris Butler, um, which is how you and I became acquainted. May I tell you, relay the story for people
yeah.
who are watching? Um, During lockdown, I was going through a lot because I had just had a brain surgery, which left me with tremors. I was a hairstylist and a nail tech, and I couldn't work in that field anymore. And I was going through a really, really bad time. My whole world was just upended again. And here I was starting over in a new way, which I didn't think I was going to ever have to do. So I ended up during lockdown watching Chris's videos um, for Sacred Tarot. I'll provide the link, you guys, check it out. Um, and I just started leaning back into my tarot work, which in turn led to other things. But um, I decided one day I was going to write him a fan letter type thing and say, thank you so much for making these videos. They got me through a tough time type thing. And to my surprise, he wrote back. And we struck up conversation. He's been giving me instructions on his decks, and I love that. He's a great guy. Um, I was in a bookstore, and I think I had just actually talked about Chris to somebody because I was still in the, I met this artist, he's so cool. And I was going through the catalog of the store owner. She's a friend of mine for the Llewellyn catalog. I saw an ad for this coming out the following year, screamed audibly out loud. Everyone turned around, looked at me, and I'm like acting like an idiot. Finally got myself under control. Sat down. I'm like, no problem. This is cool. I got this. Waited for this deck my whole life. I'm okay. This is cool. And then I read about it, and it said Chris Butler. I was like, what the hell are you talking about? And that just started it all over again. So it was a double whammy right there for me. A Hekate deck coming out and with somebody that I knew. So I went home and again sent him a letter like, dude, this is amazing. The the artwork on the deck is phenomenal. One of my favorite cards is the Pharmakia card.
That's one of my favorites as well.
Just it's got a whole different vibe. If you guys do not have this deck, check it out. The Fates is why I reach for this deck right now.
Mhm.
The questions that I have for you. The Fates are one of the first aspects that I ever met of the gods. Um, how do you view the Fates and Hecate?
So obviously that particular card, the epithet of Clothe, the spinner of fate. So that would be in relation to viewing Hecate as Hecate Clothe, Hecate the spinner of fate. You know, there's no getting away from the parallel between Hecate having a triple form and obviously the fates being a triple form of you know of a deific force. You know, if you really wanted to go back to this more modern paradigm of Maiden Mother Crone, the fates fit that one, you know, far more readily. Um, but I just kind of I always feel as though there's, although you know, I'm quite a hard polytheist, so I see my deities and spirits as quite separate and indistinct, with, you know, occasional overlap where things are not, you know, are a bit too similar for them to be separate. But I kind of, it's almost as though the fates, you know, the fates exist, and that's fine, but it's you know, and even Zeus has to bend to, you know, the will of what the fates are metering out. But it just always felt to me as though Hecate could quite easily just come in and not criticize and not interfere, but she could say, I need this pattern weaving in or whatever, and it would happen. You
Mm,
know, because she is this, again, she's, you know, quite an early generation, you know, deity. I see her as quite primeval and quite primordial, with who, you know, whose true origins go back to sort of this nebulous time we can't really figure out or comprehend. And so, yeah, I kind of feel that she firmly has her hand on the wheel of fate, you know. So although she might not necessarily be doing the measuring and the metering and the cutting, she's she's almost like you know, supervising, and you know, and if certain things need to change, or if, you know, for instance, um you know, working with her in from a witchcraft point of view, if you know, if you're asking for help to change a situation or to influence a situation, um it's very it's very telling that she could quite, you know, she can influence things to just, I can't quite remember if it's Jason Miller or Jack Grail, but they use this term of greasing the wheels of fate. And it's not to, you know, it's not to break the rules or to, you know, irreparably change things, but just ever so slightly just get them to just divert it, you know, in the right direction ever so slightly. And I think, you know, Hecate is prime for that because of her own triple aspect, but also because of that liminal quality across all, points of existence.
So for young witches who are just starting out on the path, one of the things that may come up is should they have a male aspect to work with? Is it mandatory in your opinion?
I would say no, it's not mandatory. Nothing is mandatory. Unless you belong to a specific tradition or a specific, working group that has a specific pantheon or specific, pair of deities. It's generally more of it's more the sort of Wiccan style thing of having a goddess and a god. And so, some people just view them quite generally as, the moon goddess and the horn god. Other people will pick specific deities. Some people will even pick a goddess from one pantheon and a god from another pantheon, because
I've seen that.
that's just how it comes through to them. I Speaking from personal experience, I found that Hecate does work with other deities, but she generally, for me anyway, she's kind of the big force that takes up a lot of the space. Um, I kind of she shares. I've got very small flat, so space is a premium. But she always makes sure that she has prime spot. So,
Prime real estate.
yeah, but she shares currently with Dionysus, which is another god that I have quite a close experiential relationship with. But weirdly, I've worked with um Hecate and Odin in the past. Despite despite me trying not to, because I was like, no, Odin, I can't. I've got to do Hecate stuff. And then it was just like he wasn't letting up.
Well, I've worked with for the simple fact that he's associated with Mercurius. Um, so that's my path. The I met him pretty much around the same time as Hecate when I was at my lowest. Him because I needed him at that point.
Mhm.
And it was like the two of them just worked together to bring me out of a very, very dark place and to get me back into, well, not back into a better place than I was.
Yeah, and that's a similar thing to how Hecate and Dionysus for me. I've referred to it before as being tag teamed by them. It's not the most pleasant of experiences, but it is that very raw, visceral rending down in order for you to be built back up. And it's not pleasant, but it's necessary.
Yeah, yeah, it's not pleasant at times. The thing that I face most working with these two deities is how it's perceived. So I really don't tell a lot of people outside of the magical community. Um, when they hear I work with Hecate, they're like, "Oh, dark goddess." And when they hear that I work with Hermes, "Oh, the trickster."
Hmm.
So there's these negative connotations, but Hecate is the world's soul. She's the savior. Hermes is the good shepherd. They don't take these things into account. They only know what they hear from television and movies.
Yeah.
What is the worst media poisoning you've had to deal with?
Hmm. Uh, I mean, I always view when she crops up in a media, pop culture type context, I always kind of realize that, okay, yeah, this is not going to be, you know, 100% historically accurate. It's going to be beefed up for television or for for the concept of which it's in. I will say that within the Covenant of Hecate, one of our uh torchbearers, key bearers, Hazel, she has done an extensive collation of all pop culture references across television, books, film, music, where Hecate crops up. And I mean, it's an exhaustive um analysis of it all, and she's constantly obviously adding to it as they come out. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's a phenomenal work. So, and obviously some of them are very basic. Oh, look, it's a crone goddess, or oh, look, it's a goddess of witchcraft kind of thing. I come. I think probably the worst one, which is it's not. I don't necessarily see it as Hecate, even though they kind of call it Hecate and they sort of reference the witchcraft and dark goddessy type thing. Is probably in one of the early episodes of Charmed, where there's like a man-hating, baby-eating demon or something, and they call it Hecate, and it's yeah, it's a case of just taking a name and a basic concept and just smashing them together to make some interesting antagonist for an episode on a popular show.
Two things. One, it is starting there is a little bit of a shift going on because I think witches are starting to complain, going, no, that's
Hmm.
okay. So I think there's a shift towards more.
Yeah, I mean, you look, you take that and compare that one from the one of the early seasons of Charmed, and then you look at in the chilling adventures of Sabrina, where in the later series, they brought on Hecate, and although they had her as this maiden mother crone, there was still a very much more true to life depiction
It was
of
more
Hecate.
venerated. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Um, so yeah, there is a shift, and I think the shift comes because of the hard work that people like Sarita and Cindy Brannan and other devotees and,
Kenn
and
Payne.
stuff. I well,
I'm
you could
sorry,
probably
man, but you have to understand that this is now in the lexicon of the Hecatean path. You gave it a name.
I
Until
know.
this deck came out, I had never heard the name Hecatean path. I considered myself, speaking of media, in the 70s, there was a movie of a young girl who discovered she had magical powers, um, and she worshipped Hecate. She was um, considered a Hekite witch. So growing up, I always considered myself, I was called a Hekite. And then later on in life, in my 30s, I think it was, things started to shift. But for decades, that's how I viewed it. It's Hekite. And then I see Hecatean, and I was like, I'm in. I can go. Let's roll. You have to understand that you have now provided a starting path for young witches, for young spiritualists. Um, that's stepping outside of the whole psychological aspect that cards can help you work through.
Mhm.
The spiritual aspect of these cards cannot be underplayed. This is a phenomenal tool. I use it daily in my devotional work, which bothers me sometimes because I keep pulling the same three cards, and I'm just waiting to find out what they all mean one day. But the Netheron card, the Kerberos, and New Moon are the cards that pull more than any. And there's 60 cards, right? 60. And I'm only pulling three on a regular basis. So as a cartomancer, I've been dealing with cards, working with cards since I was 15. Um, I use tarot to work on myself more than anything else. In the past few years, when I retired from the salon industry, now I'm leaning into it full time. I'm going with my strengths. I,
Mm.
for a long time, hid who I was and what I felt. And just because I wanted to be normal, fit in with everybody else around me, I'm in my 50s. Those days of trying to fit in with other people are long gone. Um, the important things to me now are, I think that's one of the things I'm trying to find out is what is important to me. And I think my spirituality is probably one of the most important things to me right now, that and my husband. Um, and he gives me the freedom to explore. He's a Christian, by the way. I mean, hardcore Christian. Don't ask how that happened. Um, the only time we've had a problem with religion was I had my altar in the living room for a long time at our old house. One day he just, you need to take this down. Um, and rather than get upset and argue with him, I was like, okay. And he was shocked, but it's a personal thing. I don't need my altar up to bond with Hekate. I can have my altar in another room where you don't. Okay,
Yeah.
this is personal. This is me and her. Has there ever been a time when you wanted to walk away?
Yeah. And it's quite an interesting story, actually. It was a good number of years ago. I lived in a different part of the city. I had a bigger house. And so I had a whole little room separate where I had my altars and I did my work. But I'd hit kind of a low point, and I'd not really been observing anything or practicing anything, and I was feeling really sort of what's the point, and like really properly like ready to just jack everything in. And I'd been out with my then partner, and we'd been out drinking, and we came home. It must have been about 4 o'clock in the morning. We were both drunk. He was obviously rattling around in the kitchen, and I just had it in my head, right, I'm going upstairs and I'm going to take everything down, and I'm just going to put it all away, and then I'll sell it or whatever. So I went upstairs, but obviously you get halfway up the stairs and then your brain goes, actually you need to go to the toilet first because you've been drinking all night. And so I went into the toilet, obviously, came out. And when I came out, the door to my room was ajar and the candles were all on. And I was like, what? I haven't left candles on all bloody night. I'm not that stupid. So I pushed the door open and my partner was stood in front of the altar. And I was like, what are you doing? And he didn't answer me. And I just kind of I just sort of kind of pushed past him and started moving the stuff. And I was just like, I'm taking it all down. I'm getting rid. And he just put one hand on my shoulder. And then the voice that came out of his mouth was not his voice. And I just literally froze on the spot and listened to what he was, well, not what he was saying, but what she was saying. And I turned round and he wasn't there. He was completely not there. And obviously she said what she needed to say, and then literally she dropped him, like a ton of bricks, and he was like, what the hell am I doing in here? What am I doing? Where how He didn't even remember coming up the stairs. And I was just I was that overcome with the whole experience. I couldn't actually talk to explain to him how he'd got up there and stuff. I ended up just putting him to bed, and then going back in the room and putting everything back and apologizing and getting quite upset about it. And I remember it still, because although at the time I was in such a bad place that I really, really, really wanted to walk away, and I've been there again, other times, but not gone to that, extreme. But I know that she is, she's with me. And like you say, your spirituality is one of those important things, despite all of my ups and downs and, the negative things that I've had to go through in my life. that my spirituality has been the one constant thing that's gone through all of it. And so I kind of, again, as I say, you learn the hard way sometimes. I've kind of learned the hard way to um do what I'm told.
That sounds, you just had this conversation with Chris and Gerald the other day when you were trying to get him to do one of the cards. Just do what Ken said.
Yeah.
Um, the Axis Monday card.
Mhm.
Show this to everybody. That is probably one of my favorite cards for a couple of reasons. Mainly, um, because I work with tarot, that is where I lean my strengths towards. The Axis Monday reminds me of the World card at the end,
Mhm.
um, where she's got two wands in her hands, completion, and it's just so beautiful, encompassing the three realms of Hekate as guardian, guide, and gatekeeper. Three realms of this. What was the inspiration? What brought that image?
So I knew I wanted to include Axis Mundi in the deck. Obviously, it's quite it's quite an evocative concept when you read about it, in relation to things like the Chaldean oracles, where she's seen as this world soul, this world pillar, and then you look into other similar things where you have concepts of the world tree. You've got like Yggdrasil and things like that in Norse culture, and I just started to see Hecate in this very cosmic and titanic sort of scale, and her being this pillar through all of creation, and the center point of all existence is her, and everything revolves out and around from her. But also, again, you've got the underworld, the middle realms, and the upper world. So it's almost like you can use her as a world tree to access these realms. And again, it was like I kind of had all of this rattling around in my head, and I'm thinking, yeah, but how do I make that into a cogent image? How do you translate all of those words into an image? And I kind of just said to Chris, I was like, this is what I need it to kind of convey, but I'm not sure how we're going to do it. And he was like, once I started to sort of draw the parallels between sort of like world tree imagery and things like that, you know, if you look at the sort of background, you can see that there are branches and
I
stuff
didn't
coming.
notice that until yesterday when you guys were talking about it on Gerald's channel.
Mm,
I did not notice the branches, the little rootlings going on.
yeah. And then obviously, so she's like the main trunk of the world pole, the world tree, the world axis. And then, so she bridges all of the realms, and then you have all of these, roots and branches and things that come off it.
The thing I love about this card is um when I do my cards, I keep a bag of stones with me, a chakra bag, chakra stones in it with 9 instead of the 7. I also add the Earth Star and the Soul Star
Mhm.
chakras, and that's what that reminds me of is the Earth Star chakra, the root chakra, the Soul Star chakra. Um, going,
I'd not actually thought of it in that context, but yeah, that makes perfect sense.
it's just gorgeous. It's my favorite word, gorgeous. Um, what I wasn't going to ask this, but I'm going to. If there was one card you could change in the deck,
Hmm. I don't think there's a card that I would change now. Um, Obviously, like before we actually submitted it for, ahead of printing, we only needed to make minor tweaks to certain cards, just certain light balances, certain color tweaks. There was no real overhaul of any one image. It was quite superficial changes that we needed to make. However, there was one card in particular that was exceptionally problematic. And I can't find the bloody thing. It was the Kirke card. Wherever she's hiding in my deck, I can't find her. She's run off, even probably because I'm because I'm complaining about her.
There she is.
But yeah, she was problematic because what I was trying to get out of my head just wouldn't work on paper initially. So I had obviously because Chris works a lot with silhouette and that kind of thing, but I kind of wanted this. In my head, I kind of saw her in, like the sort of Eastern dancers with veils and things like that. A very sort of mobile and sensuous sort of image, but obviously it wasn't translating properly when like converting into silhouette. The silhouettes became blobby and indistinct, and then initially we decided obviously we would go with just quite a seductive silhouette, but we wouldn't have it too in too much motion. And we we initially had a smaller wand in the hand, but it looked very clip arty and not very good. And the pigs at the bottom weren't as prominent, and so it didn't it didn't convey in my head what I was trying to do. And it was only, but the weird thing was, is even though me and Chris were both struggling with it, and we had some initial dislikes about the card. Every time we showed that image to people, everybody was like, "Oh my God, that's amazing! I really like that card." I'm like, "It's doing our head in."
The one that
And
does my head in, honestly, is the Medea card.
really,
I just stare at that card. It's well, one of the reason my first girlfriend's name was Medea. Um, and I've actually looked for her online and I can't find her. It is what I imagine a priestess of Hecate to be back in the day.
Mhm.
This is what I see when I think antiquity. What did her followers look like? What was their, how do they operate? And this is what comes to mind for me. So you nailed that, and I thank you.
And
It's
I think that's possibly where we had some of the issues with the Kirke card, because we did the Medea card first. And I was so pleased with the way that Medea had turned out, because it was exactly what I was trying to convey. And then we just struggled with the Kirke card because I didn't want her to be portrayed like she often is. Same as Medea, they're often just reduced down to these tragic, villainous figures, when actually that's a very small part of their story. They have, a much richer um, mythology behind them. Um, and yeah, so I think possibly some of the reasoning we had problems birthing the Kirke card was because we were so happy with Medea that we kind of wanted it to be on an equal par, and I don't think we probably could quite do the same again without it being too repetitive.
the card that causes me a little agita, as we say, is the bondage card.
Hmm.
That one just conveys a sense of restriction, unease. Um, I know that you had a list of things. I heard the story of how you and Chris hooked up. You had a list of things that you wanted to go down. How long did it take you to put this list together? How long have you been working?
So Well, I mean, 'cause as before as I say, before I approached Chris initially, I was working on the concept of the deck as an appendix to this, as yet unfinished book project, and then so I had the bare bones as an idea out, and obviously I already had my little self-made prototype that I was, just of basic images and such, and it was, but then it was during the sort of writing of that appendix, I started to expand the idea, and I think initially I got it up because one of my big bugbears is Oracle decks that only have about 20 cards in, because it's like it doesn't matter how well you shuffle them, you are likely to just keep getting the same cards. And so I really, really, really wanted to have more than 20 to 30 cards in. And I think initially it was sort of somewhere in the region of 45. But then the more I started doing, like, expanding on it, it just kept going. And to be honest, I could have carried on going, but it would have been ridiculous. Um, and so we kind of drew the line at 60. Um, but yeah, when I first heard back from Chris, he said, "Oh yeah, we'll do a Skype call, and we'll just we'll chat it out." And he was prepared to shoot me down because he'd had a few failed collaboration attempts for varying reasons. From his point of view, mostly because people hadn't done their homework, or they knew what they didn't want but not what they actually wanted.
Right.
So he would do things and they would go, "No, I don't want that." And he was like, "Well, what do you want?" "Well, I don't know, but I don't want that." And so it just didn't really work. Whereas for me, when he asked me for all these things, like he wanted a full sort of concept, a list of cards, numbers, and titles, and a couple of ideas of actual visuals for the cards. I already had all of that, and so I just said, "Yeah, I'll email that over. As soon as we get off this, I will ping it straight." And yeah, I think when he got that and he looked at it, he said, he knew then that this was different, that I knew what I was what I was talking about.
Authentic, I believe, is the word he used to describe.
Hmm.
Um, that is what has gone before, what's going on now, what's coming up for you.
Well, I mean,
And may I make a request? Go ahead.
mhm. Well, all I was going to say is for me personally, this still hasn't quite sunk in. And I know it sounds ridiculous because I've been sat here talking to you, and I was talking to Gerald the night before, and I've spoken to a few other people.
You know why we're trying to get in to talk to you first? Because, dude, I have no doubt you are blowing up. I mean, it's obvious. Number one on the Amazon shopping list, was it?
For a while, yeah. Yeah, it's been really I mean, because obviously the Amazon charts are really the only thing we can monitor at the moment until, next year when the royalties and that are calculated. But yeah, I mean the American Amazon charts, it was the number one new release in two categories for a good few weeks. And I think it's back into the top 10 and within the top 20,000 of all books today, based on yesterday's live with Gerald. Because that happened with the previous live. We had a
Part of me
search
wants to just slap you through the. How could you not know this was going to happen? As soon as I saw it, I knew, and I jumped on.
I
I wrote
think
that letter to Chris.
I mean, I'm the first one to sit here and admit that I am the most self-deprecating, compliment deflecting person you will ever meet. That as much as I created this deck, and as I say in the book, an offering from me both to the goddess and to the community. It's almost a lot of the things that I've ever created, whether it's been little bits that I've written, or ritual or poetry, or indeed this, there's always a kind of, I don't like to use the word channeled, but it's like a semi-channeled sort of effort And then when it's done, when I look at it, it's like looking at it, but not having the ownership of it. It's like, yes, this is beautiful, but I don't. It's hard to explain adequately. I just, I mean, yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm absolutely flabbergasted with how it has, been received and how people are, really, really enthused and positive, and it's been so rewarding to see people using it because that in a it's without sounding trite, that's all I've ever wanted. I wanted people to have what I always wanted, which was a deck that was easily
Well, you've
accessible.
provided something that we didn't have, um, is a tool to help learn not only the goddess's aspects or history, but a tool for how to connect. Dude, come on. This is phenomenal. Um, and on behalf of witches and cartomancers everywhere, thank you. I just cannot tell you thank you enough. What kind of deck can we expect from you? I know you've got a book in the works, you said.
Yeah, so obviously the booklet that comes with the deck is very concise, because it's a multilingual booklet and things like that. So
Cerebellum. Yeah.
yeah, the detail that I wanted to go into, I didn't have the scope for, from the publisher specs. So I am still in the process of writing the book that I wanted, the one that would help it to be more of an educational tool and a learning tool as well as a divinatory tool, so that you can learn more about what each of those aspects or each of those symbols means and what the history in relation to Hecate specifically is, so that you can build all of this information up. Because that's ultimately what I wanted. I wanted it to be both divinatory and devotional and learning tool,
See,
this
that's
all
what I
round.
appreciate about it. It is not a tool that says this is what you have to do. This is not the way. This is something that says, look, this is her names. This is what she does. Have at it. Get to
Mm,
know her. And I have no doubt that the gods take it from there. That's between the person and divinity. I can only speak for myself and say that when I received the deck, it was more than I was expecting. Um, it One thing I want to say is, and I say this specifically because that new movie Tarot is coming out, and I'm
mm,
a little nervous about that being a professional reader. Um, Cards themselves do not maintain any power or strength. They are a tool. So if anybody's watching, wondering why we're using these evil cards, they're not. Okay, people use Bibles for divination. That's something that people don't take into account. It's just easy to say
mhm,
tarot cards are bad. Um, the cards themselves have no inherent power. It's how you apply them, what tools, which way you use the tool. This is something we understand, but that's because we've been around the block a little. People fresh off the witch boat don't know this stuff. This is a tool for them to help learn,
mm.
and it's appreciated. Um, I'm excited in the same way I was when Cindy Brenna's book first came out. I was stoked. It's the same exact feeling. And I don't mean to sit here and stroke you and say, oh, you're fantastic, but dude, you're fantastic. Okay. um, what Tell me more about your future projects because I need something
So
forward to.
there are ideas that have been percolating even before we finished this project. I had the voices and I was just like, hang on a minute, we're not even finishing this one yet. Hold your horses. Um, we do want to explore a couple of different projects. one involving a continuation of sorts. We want to sort of we do want to explore a tarot that complements this.
Yes, that was going to be my suggestion. Remember, I said I had some suggestions.
We haven't kind of said much about it yet, but it is, as I say, that was already being whispered in my ear before we'd finished this. And I have already been working on it bit at a time. And that we will look at, obviously, doing that. And it will be a standard, you know, tarot. It won't have superfluous additions or alterations really, but it will have a specific Hecate angle. And obviously both myself and Chris will be using our experience of tarot and my experience of Hecate to sort of make it cohesive and workable. And there are a couple of other projects, and I really should get my backside into gear and actually finish my other book project, which is just a book about sort of Hecatean worship, based on from my point of view, with my ideas and things, not without just not without rehashing things that have already come before. So yeah, I've got a couple of things in the pipeline.
On your channel, you have a lot of rituals and things that you have written yourself.
Yeah, there's I mean, my YouTube channel's not had a huge amount of new stuff on it recently. Um, just because I'm not I'm still quite new to all of this. Putting myself on camera is not something that I'm always I have to be in the
Me
right
either, brother.
mindset
We're doing it different.
But yeah, I mean, a lot of the rituals that have been put that I did, they've kind of been written by myself at some point or other, or adapted from other things to suit a certain need. Um, and again, when I get the muse, and it all comes quite readily, and then I will have these stagnating points where nothing happens. So
The idea of you coming out with a tarot deck of the Hecatean path just makes my little body quiver. I'm just silly now. Um, Ken, I want to thank you again for taking the time to talk to me and clear up things.
no,
Awesome.
thank you for inviting me to talk about it.
And you guys, I'm going to put the link to Ken's channel in the description box. I highly also provide a link to purchase the deck. I know Gerald likes to say purchase responsibly. Buy them. um, I know I have my one deck that I use for devotion, but I'm getting another one that I can use in readings.
Mhm.
Nobody touches those in the gods. So I want to say thanks again, Ken, and be looking out for your next. All right.
Thank you.
All right. See you guys on the next video. Thanks.